We are halfway through the 2020s, 5 more calendar years in this decade, and there are 4 major Texas athletic programs that have not won a championship in the first half. But do we think they can win a championship in the second half? We discuss.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get up to $150 in bonus bets when they place a bet on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I didn't have my ads up, so I had to just do that off the top of my head. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we are discussing the championship outlook of the football team, the men's basketball team, the women's basketball team, and the baseball team over the next 5 seasons, right? Throughout the first 5 years of the 2020s, right? None of these teams have won a championship, and that's okay, right? I'm just stating that it hasn't happened. But do we think one of these programs, if not more, can win a championship over the next 5 seasons before we enter the 2030s? That's going to be the first segment. And then the second segment, the quarterback situation, basically for the rest of the decade, right? Because it looks like we have it figured out. When you're talking about Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, Trey Owens, KJ Lacey, and Dia Bell, that is an all-star lineup of potential quarterbacks at the 40 acres. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I wanted to talk about the championship outlook. And in terms of the first 5 years for men's basketball, women's basketball, and football, those have already been decided in terms of championships. Baseball is still yet to be decided, but obviously Texas is not in the field, so they will not have won a championship between 2020 and 2024, right? And so then the question is can one of these programs win a championship between 2025 and 2029, right? And I do think, these 4 programs are well positioned to at least compete, right? Obviously, the baseball team, there's some questions about if David Pierce is the guy, if NIL, has been good enough for us or, fruitful enough for us, I guess, if we're doing a good enough job bringing in the high end talent and using the transfer portal. And then obviously, you're stepping up in talent into the SEC where baseball is king, right? And so, Texas may have the baseball team may have the least positive outlook out of those 4 programs, but we're still the Omaha. You know what I mean? People still want to come to the University of Texas to play the highest level of baseball. And I don't think anybody would be shocked if we won a championship over the next 5 seasons. So when we look at these 4 programs, all right, and I'm only talking about these 4 programs because these are the 4 that I watch, right? These are the 4 that I invest in with my own personal time. Obviously, Texas has won the Directors Cup. I know volleyball, men's swimming and diving, and all of those programs are excellent and outstanding, right, and represent the University of Texas well. But these are the 4 programs I watch, right? So these are the 4 programs I'm qualified to talk about on Locked On Longhorns. So let's start with the football team, right? And, things were great last year, 12-2, Sugar Bowl appearance, did lose to the Washington Huskies, but you were a player or 2 away from the national championship game. And when you look at the outlook over the next 5 years, the question is, do you think this Texas football team will win a championship between 2025 and 2029? And I do not have my burnt orange glasses on, right? I am not being biased, right? I am not saying this just because I host Locked On Longhorns. I've said this plenty of times, in the past, off the record. This is my first time saying it on the record, potentially, right? I do think that the Texas Longhorns football team will win a championship this decade. They will win a championship in the next 5 years. The reason I believe that is because when you look at it right now, we've seen steady growth since this staff has entered the University of Texas, right? Since Steve Sarkisian and his staff have come over, right? You've seen 5-7, then you've seen 8-5, and then you've seen 12-2, right? You're not at the point now where you can just continue to go up and wins every season, right? You're probably plateauing unless you get to 13, 14, 15, win the championship, go undefeated, whatever. But we have seen incremental growth in this program in terms of, actual winning, but in terms of culture, development, and recruiting. That has all been a plus, right? Everything has gotten better since Steve Sarkisian and his staff have came to the University of Texas compared to where we were before then, right? When you look at it from a pure talent perspective, Texas just put 11 players in the NFL draft. Texas very well could put another 11 players in the 2025 NFL draft. When you look at our starters, right, I would say just off the top of my head, blue chip rate would be, if we have 22 starters, I would say at least 18 of them are 4 stars or 5 stars, if not more. But I'm going to be safe and say at least 18 of our 22 starters are blue chip players, right? Pretty much what we're bringing in is a 75+% blue chip rate in our recruiting classes, right? At least 75% of our recruiting classes that we're bringing in are 4 stars or 5 stars. And that number is only going to continue to get higher, right? If Texas continues to win with the resources they have, they're going to get the best players in the country, whether it be from high school or the transfer portal, right? So when you look at it, the staff is in place. This is a winning staff, right? The culture is in place. This is a winning culture. They're always going to have elite football players at damn near every position. I think the only positions we haven't recruited at an elite level thus far in the Steve Sarkisian era are tight end and defensive tackle. Everywhere else, we've recruited 5 stars, right? And I think you can go out and get tight ends and defensive tackles, especially now in the transfer portal. But when you look at the most important position on the field, and we're going to talk about this more in the next segment, right? Texas is set up for success because they're arguably going to have the best or one of the best quarterbacks in the country for at least, it looks like, the next 5 years. This year will be quarterbacked by Quinn Ewers, right? Early favorite to win the Heisman. Next year will be Arch Manning, who I absolutely believe will be one of the best quarterbacks in college football. Then he has the potential to stay in 2026, as well for 2 years. But even if he doesn't, you have Trey Owens in 2026, possibly 2027. You have KJ Lacey in 2027, possibly 2028. Or you have Dia Bell in 2027 or 2028, possibly 2029, right? So your whole entire rest of the decade is mapped out by potentially elite, right? Because they haven't played yet, most of them, but potentially elite blue chip quarterbacks at the University of Texas, right? You compare that with the staff and the talent. You compare that with the players around these quarterbacks, right? And you compare that with the resources Texas has to reload every single year. And I don't think there's any scenario in which Texas can go the next 5 years without winning a championship. Maybe they get to the championship and lose it, and just have bad luck in the playoffs outside of that. But I'm staking my claim in the ground. Texas will win. The football team will win a championship in the next 5 seasons. They will be hoisting a trophy before 2030. Or I guess it could be in 2030, but it would be the 2029 season. So, yes, by the year 2030, or in 2030, the Texas football team will be hoisting a national championship trophy. Now, moving on to the basketball team. This one's going to be tough. If I had to answer it right now, I would say no, just because there's so many factors in place. Really, revolves around a lot of luck, right? The national champion in basketball and men's basketball is going to always have to go to the tournament and win 6 straight games, right? That is the standard for a champion in college basketball. You have to go to the tournament and win 6 straight games against 6 random opponents in 3 different locations, or if you get to the championship, is it 4, right? The first weekend, the second weekend, third weekend. Yeah. So 6 different games in 3 different locations, right? That's what you have to do to win the championship. So even the best team in the regular season, there's no guarantee that they'll be able to do that, go through that type of gauntlet in the NCAA tournament, right? That's why it's March Madness. That's why it creates, so many crazy moments. Then you look at it and it really comes down to luck in terms of your bracket, right? Who you're facing, whether their players are healthy or not, and what happens around you, right? Because if you look at it this year, I'm not sure North Carolina could have beat UConn in the Final Four, but we'll never know because Alabama beat them to get there, right? I'm not sure if Purdue beat somebody else in the Final Four, but they got the opportunity to play NC State, a team that shouldn't have been there, and that's why they got to the championship. So, you need luck on your side in the tournament, but you also need luck in the bracket around you, right, to help you reach the pinnacle, right? And we've seen this Texas program have players like TJ Ford, Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge, and not be able to reach the pinnacle, right? Because it's hard. You have to get there and win 6 straight games. And then when you look at it, right, I do think Texas will have teams that'll be talented enough potentially to do it. I mean, when you look at it this year, from Jordan Pope to, Tremont Mark to, Trey Johnson, just all the players they brought in, they have a really talented team. But is it a team that you can say definitively can go win the championship? I'm not sure right now, right? Are you saying this is a team that definitively can go win 6 games in the tournament? I'm not sure right now, right? And you still have to compete with the teams who may not win it every year, but are there every year, right? North Carolina, UConn, Duke, Kansas, schools like that are going to be in the mix every year, right? Texas is still trying to get to the point to when they're in the mix at all, right? You know what I mean? We went to the Elite 8, but that was a one-time flash in the pan over a decade span, right? So when I look at it, I think Texas is going to be good in terms of NIL and recruiting. I think they're going to do very well in terms of bringing in high-level players to the University of Texas like we've always been able to do. But will they be able to bring in a team over the next 5 years that can run through the gauntlet of a regular season, get to that moment in March Madness and win 6 straight games. If I had to bet right now, I would say that is very unlikely. I mean, it's something Texas has never done, period. So to say that they would do it in the next 5 years, like I said, I just find it very unlikely. Potentially, right? Because anything can happen. And Texas, certainly with their resources, can bring in one of the best rosters in college basketball. But building that foundation, building that culture, being able to get to the tournament and win 6 straight games, I'm not sure if I see that happening in the next 5 years for the basketball team on the men's side. On the women's side, they certainly have an opportunity, but it'll be tough as well. When you look at it last year, number 1 seed, you have Rory Harmon coming back next year. You have Madison Booker, who will be here for the next 3 seasons. You have 2 top 10 recruits coming in this class. And we know a Vic Schaefer-led team is always going to be amazing on the defensive end, one of the best defensive teams in the country. So you have that foundation. I think this was a team last year that didn't shoot enough threes. I think moving forward, especially with Rory Harmon coming back, this team will shoot a lot more threes. And this is a team that's going to dominate in the paint, right? So if you have a team that defends well, if you have a team that can shoot threes, you have a bona fide scorer, 2 bona fide scorers, and Rory Harmon and Madison Booker, and you have a team that can play through the post, right? You have a team that can excel at every level of basketball you need to excel at to win a championship. And when you looked at it last year, this team was a number 1 seed and should have made it to the Final Four, but ended up losing to NC State, who was kind of the Cinderella team of the tournament in that bracket, right? But like I said, you had the number 1 seed. You have Vic Schaefer, one of the best coaches in the country, and you have some of the best players in the country. You have a star to build around for the next 3 seasons, and you're able to recruit with the resources you have at the University of Texas. The drawback, or what could prevent you from reaching that stage, is the fact that you now have a USC team led by Juju Watkins, right, who has brought in 2 high-level transfers from Stanford and Oregon State, and then they have one of the best recruiting classes in the country. USC will be a bona fide championship contender the next 3 years because players want to play with Juju Watkins. When you look at South Carolina, they just went undefeated last year, and 3 players coming off the bench were true freshmen. So South Carolina, over the next 3 seasons, will be probably the championship favorite going into the season. UConn is not going anywhere, right? You have other teams around college basketball that are not going anywhere. Texas definitely has one of the best chances to win a championship over the next 5 years. I would say if you're ranking it in college basketball, Texas right now has the 3rd or 4th, maybe best chance to win a championship in the next 5 years, right? Maybe 4th or 5th, however you want to look at it. The problem is that women's college basketball is still pretty top heavy, right? And when you look at it, USC, UConn, and South Carolina may be in a class of their own, right? And even if Texas is a 1 seed or fighting for a 1 seed, those teams could still be head and shoulders above Texas because of the way that the talent is dispersed in college basketball for women, or lack thereof. So I do think Texas women's basketball, in terms of all the 4 programs I'm mentioning, probably are closest to winning a championship. You could, probably compare that with the Texas football team and say the Texas football team has a really good outlook as well. But like I said, this women's basketball team was a number 1 seed last year, and their biggest star has 3 more seasons on campus, right? So the women's basketball team certainly has a really good outlook to win one of the 5 next championships. The problem is that USC, UConn, and South Carolina are so far ahead of the pack that Texas can be really, 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 really good, just like the softball team, but end up running into a juggernaut that they just can't get past. And then when we talk about the baseball team, like I said, the outlook right now isn't the best, right? You probably need to replace your coach. You certainly need to replace your pitching coach. And it just looks like this team hasn't had the requisite talent to compete at the highest level over the last couple of years. So you feel like you need to make some internal changes, but it's still the Texas baseball team. You're going to the SEC, which should prop you up in terms of recruiting, right? Players want to play in the best league in college baseball. That's the SEC, right? And do I think that Texas could certainly, especially with the transfer portal, when you can rebuild year in and year out, do I think that Texas certainly could put together a team that could, get deep in terms of the Super Regionals, College World Series, and then get hot and make a run to win the championship over the next 5 seasons? Of course, right? Even though the outlook right now seems dim, even though we've gone through a few years of not truly representing what this baseball program means, there's no question in my mind that a program this rich, I mean, the richest program in college baseball, right, in terms of the Omaha Horns and what they've been able to do with their success in College World Series, in the College World Series in the past, even though things haven't been great, it doesn't take long to rebuild a program like this. Even the University of Texas went from 5-7 in terms of the football, 5-7 to 12-2 in just 2 years, right? Because it's a sleeping giant. Like, you have all the resources there. You just need competency, right? And I'm just not me calling David Pierce incompetent, you know what I mean? Anything like that. But like I said, even though the baseball team has not looked great, we're still closer than we seem, right? Like objects in the mirror are closer than they appear because of the foundation of this program. You just really got to get the right pieces in there, but the foundation is still there. And 5 years is a long time, right? 2020 to 2024. I mean, think about it. 2020, that's when the pandemic hit. That's when Kobe passed. That was a very long time ago, right? 2024 to 2029 or 2025 to 2030. I keep saying 2030. Geez, 2030, right? However you want to look at it, right? The Texas baseball team, I would not be shocked, and I don't think any of you listening should be shocked if they were to win a championship over the next 5 years. So when I look at the championship outlook for the 4 major programs at the University of Texas that I invest in, once again, right? It's no disrespect to the volleyball team and all of that. That'll probably win a championship as well over the next 5 years, but I can only respond to what I watch. Texas football team, I believe they will win a championship over the next 5 seasons. Texas men's basketball team, I don't believe they will win a championship over the next 5 seasons. The Texas women's basketball team, I think they're well positioned to do so, but it's going to take an upset at some point in the tournament, possibly over a South Carolina, over a USC. So if I had to give a definitive answer, I will say yes, right? I do think they figure it out at least once in the next 5 years. And then the baseball team, it's tough. I'm going to say no. It wouldn't shock me if they won it, but I'm going to say no. So I think women's basketball and football, they get one over the next 5 years. Men's basketball and baseball come close, but they do not get one over the next 5 seasons. A quick word from our sponsors, and we talk about Texas, who certainly for the rest of the decade has the best quarterback situation in college football. How do I keep saying 2020, 30? I mean, I get it, right? Because we're in the 2020s, but like, you would think I would have caught it by like the 3rd time. Damn. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by, I am pulling it up right now. I apologize. So I'll just take this moment to tell y'all, we're in Texas, so happy Juneteenth to everybody that celebrated yesterday. I planned on doing the Monday, Wednesday, Friday rollout this week in terms of episodes, but I already had to work my 9 to 5 yesterday on Juneteenth, so just out of respect, I couldn't work both jobs. So that's why I didn't do the podcast yesterday. So shout out to everybody that celebrated Juneteenth. Shout out to everybody that watched Kendrick Lamar and Friends concert. It was super dope in LA at the Forum. So yeah, I just had to get that off my chest while I was stalling to open this ad read. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guarantee Fit, your part is guaranteed fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guarantee Fit only available to U.S. customers. 2030, 2030, 2030, 2030, 2030. All right, I just wanted to prove I'm better than my last mistake, right? Better than I was before the ad read. All right, when we look at the quarterback situation for the University of Texas, this is why I have confidence that they'll win a championship over the next 5 seasons, right? We knew that bringing in Steve Sarkisian, the quarterback whisperer, right? We expected outstanding quarterback play at the University of Texas, outstanding quarterback recruiting, and then just outstanding offense as a whole, right? And I think we're really starting to see that, right? We've seen, the quarterback recruiting, even though it started off, with Casey Thompson and Hudson Card, bless their hearts. But now we're starting to see the blue chips, the high-end guys, right? The Quinn Ewers, the Archman, and then, of course, I mentioned Trey Owens, KJ Lacey, and Dia Bell is the outlook right now for the rest of the decade. And, of course, we know that, Steve Sarkisian will identify his guy in 2027, 2028, and, the show goes on, like Lupe Fiasco said. That's one of my favorite songs, like when I was growing up in like high school or whatever. So I'm just dropping crazy references today. But when you look at the, quarterback position and you look at the outlook, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find a year expected, I guess, in the 2020s where Texas won't have one of the best quarterback situations in the league, right? Because if you're constantly bringing in, you brought in the 2 top quarterbacks in their class in Arch Manning and Quinn Ewers. You brought in a guy in Trey Owens who got his 4th star late, but certainly looks like one of the best quarterbacks in the country. And, I'm certainly going to defer to Steve Sarkisian and staff when it comes to that. And then you talk about KJ Lacey, a high 4-star, I think a top, 120 player in the country overall. And then Dia Bell, a 5-star, son of NBA player Rajah Bell in the 2026 class. every year your starting quarterback should be one of the most talented or one of the best in the country, right? Based on where they're recruited, right? If the eval is correct, then Texas for the next 5 years should have one of the best quarterbacks in the country starting in that burnt orange and white, if not the best quarterback in the country. And the good thing is what we've seen from Quinn Ewers is quarterbacks get hurt. We know that, right? So if Quinn Ewers gets hurt, you have Arch Manning on the bench. If Arch Manning gets hurt, you have Trey Owens on the bench. If Trey Owens gets hurt, you have KJ Lacey on the bench. And if KJ Lacey gets hurt, eventually you have Dia Bell and some player that's probably in middle school right now on the bench, right? So, you know what I mean? It's like Texas, in terms of their starter and their backup, will have arguably the best quarterback situation in the country for the next 5 seasons. And then when you look at it in terms of a year-by-year basis, this is how it could play out, right? We know that 2024 will be quarterbacked by Quinn Ewers, right? Got to knock on wood for that, brother. You know what I'm saying? But we know 2024 will be quarterbacked by Quinn Ewers, right? Barring anything crazy happening or an injury happening for the 4th straight season that he's a starter. Got to knock on wood for that, brother, once again. Then next year will be 2025, right? Arch Manning will be the starter in 2025. Now, it'll be an interesting situation because Arch Manning has already sat on campus for 2 years behind Quinn Ewers. So when this will be the 2nd year he sits. So next year, he'll be draft eligible, right? And so depending on how 2025 goes, does Arch Manning want to come back, for another year at the University of Texas? I would think most quarterbacks would want to spend at least 2 years as a starter at their respective universities, since they'll never get the opportunity to do it again. But, you have the politics, you have the business of it. If he has a great year and he's projected to go top 5 or even top 3 in the NFL draft, how do you pass that up and say, I'm going to go back to college and do it again, right? Because anything could happen, right? Knock on wood again, but he could get smoked in the first game and be out for the entire year and lose millions, right? That may not mean as much to Arch Manning it was mean to other quarterbacks, but still, right? Like, there is a chance that 2025 could go great for him, right? He could be projected to go high. He could turn that down, and then anything could happen in 2026. So I think if he has a great season in 2025, which I expect, then the smart thing to do is going to be leave and go to the draft, even though I would love to see Arch Manning as a starting quarterback for the next 2 seasons at the University of Texas. So if he quarterbacks in 2025, right, and he decides to move on after that, then you have Trey Owens in 2026, possibly 2027 if you need him to be, if you feel like KJ Lacey is not ready at that point. But even if he just quarterbacks 2026, right, and then KJ Lacey is ready in 2027, you now have KJ Lacey in 2027, possibly 2028. But let's say he only quarterbacks 2027, then you should have Dia Bell ready in 2028, right? Now, let's say 2028, we just have a string of 1-year quarterbacks, right? Then Dia Bell only does 2028. But then you've recruited somebody, right, in the 2027 class that should be ready in 2029. And now you spanned the entire decade, right, with 5 or 6 blue chip quarterbacks. But let's go back to the more likely, or I'm going to say the more likely scenario, but the scenario that I would love, right? Let's say Arch Manning quarterbacks 2025 and 2026 after Quinn Ewers quarterbacks 2024, right? So let's say Arch Manning takes care of 2025 and then 2026. Then you have Trey Owens as a senior in 2027 in kind of like a Mac Jones role, right? Where he's waited, 4 years to get his shot and then balls out in that 4th year, right? So that would be 2027, right? Then you have 2028, right? KJ Lacey, if he's still on campus at that point, would be an upperclassman, and then he would be able to start. And then after that, Dia Bell, if he's still on campus and he's an upperclassman, he would be able to start, right? And then if not, if one of them enters the transfer portal, then you just supplement that with the transfer portal recruiting or high school recruiting to make sure you have your quarterback of the future. So I don't see any scenario over the next 5 to 6 years or the rest of the decade where Texas won't have elite to borderline elite quarterback play. And that's one of the biggest reasons why I'm confident that they'll win a championship by the year 2031, because when you look at the quarterback position, it's elite for the next 5 to 6 years, and the players around them, elite for the next 5 to 6 years. And this coaching staff right now is elite. And if it stays in place, they'll be elite for the next 5 to 6 years. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.